let's bring the
We
cameras
will.
on.
All right. Well, I am Patrick Designer, Production O'Keefe. I'm Patrick O'Keefe, Production Designer of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse.
And I'm Michael Lasker, Visual Effects Supervisor of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse.
And today we're going to talk and dive into the why and
the how of how we made this film. So let's go. So when we made this movie, we knew the principal challenge would be to create a film that pushed the envelope of artistic and technical innovation. It would have to redefine what visual effects could achieve in animation and evoke the perception of a handcrafted aesthetic. And that was really the key. To create 6 vast and different unique worlds, our dev team innovated and built tool sets from the ground up. These new tools gave artists the ability to paint millions of brushstrokes in 3D space, draw ink lines inspired by different styles of comic art, create realistic dripping paint, and control shadow and light like an illustrator or painter would. Ultimately, the goal was to be able to drive the emotion of the movie in ways never seen before. Amazing characters. Here's Spot, our villain, Jessica Drew.
Ziggy.
So 600 unique characters were created to inhabit these worlds. And it's really what made it feel authentic. We created a brand new crowd system that was really specific and less generic. And that's really integral to bringing these worlds to life. You can see a lot of that at this barbecue scene. It really makes you feel like you're at an authentic party. And beyond that, we created over 150 spider characters using a brand new spider crowd system that we'll get into a little bit later. And then beyond that, we built over 50 villains, designed, rigged, being able to perform. They were very specific and complex, and each had a unique render style. So using this new spider crowd system, you'll see in a sec, we were able to create not millions, thousands of spider characters.
We could do millions.
We could if we wanted to, but it gave animation the ability to create different proportions, different logos, different colors. And on top of that whole spider society, we also built this spider cat right here. And a dinosaur. Love that guy. Spider-Verse films are exhilarating because the constant creative challenges, and it's all about collaboration between the art department, the directors, and our team at ImageWorks doing the effects. And Patrick O'Keefe, who is almost as cool as Spider-Punk, is going to take it away. And let's get started.
Excuse my cough. But before all of that, before anything, we have to go back to the foundation of all of this. And it starts with our love for comic books and what our experience, all of us, not just the filmmakers, but the audience, what our experience with comic books is. What was it like being a little kid reading comic books, or as an adult reading comic books, which always makes me feel like I'm a little kid still. But that cracking open a new comic book, you could smell the printing process, you can smell the ink, you can see the little dots on screen, right? You got your nose so close to it that you can see the off registration, all the little mistakes and mishaps that happen throughout the printing process, the artist's hand right on the page. And this is what became our guiding principle when it came to making all these Spider-Verses. It's the DNA of the comic book up on screen. These little Band-Aid dots that make up everything on the printed page would become the atoms of the universe that we were creating. The Spider-Verse we were creating. We need to translate all that into a cinematic language. And the other guiding principle is this isn't your predecessor Spider-Man, right? This is a new Spider-Man for a new age that demands a new style of animation, a new style of filmmaking. It's your boy, Miles Morales, Michael Lasker Morales. We're all caffeinated up here. Miles Morales, he was created in 2011 by writer Brian Michael Bendis and artist Sarah Pacelli, and he represents this new Spider-Man, this new age of Spider-Man. And again, it's this idea that we're going to need to bring that newness to screen. He's a biracial kid, right? He's not some nerdy photographer. He's got swag. He lives in Brooklyn and he's growing up. He's got a loving family. Usually if you want to be a superhero, the first thing you're going to want to do is off at least one of your parents, ideally both, in a dark alley. It's a good origin story. It gives you good motivation. If anyone out there is trying to become a superhero, I recommend it. But no, he's got a family, and that's something that's new about this character as well. He's got a loving family, and they're working through their problems. This is also going to guide us in the decisions we're going to make throughout the film. we see all these different principles, all these new ideas, and these are what becomes these guiding ideas for the rest of the film. It's going to be comic books. It's going to be Miles. It's going to be about family and love and togetherness and accepting and celebrating the differences. These are the ideas that are going to give us the ability to make decisions as we move forward.
So returning to the Spider-Verse meant going back to the beginning. We began development by looking at the visuals we created for Miles Morales and Into the Spider-Verse. On that film, we realized we had to go back to basics and rethink how we made movies. A huge part of that was reinventing virtually every aspect of filmmaking and overcoming countless challenges in order to bring a comic book to life. Across the Spider-Verse takes place about 18 months later. So naturally, we had to build an older Miles with an upgraded suit that includes Kevlar and higher detail. We worked to enhance our render style from the first film and honed our techniques in order to feel the artist's hand in every frame. We built new sets that explored Miles' life in Brooklyn, a rich environment that we wanted to feel authentic. What's so exhilarating about working on films like Spider-Verse is that our creative goal is to bring the concept art to life. And that starts to happen in the look development process. Here you can see the exterior of the bodega. This is actually our very first environment that we built on the show. There's the counselor's office. So when we began working on Across the Spider-Verse, we wanted to take what we loved the most visually from the first film and make that the standard to start from. The render script was derived from printing process techniques of early comics, including Ben-Day dots, halftones, hatching, and offsetting. And we also misregistered color and added ink lines to get an authentic comic book feel. It was so much fun getting back to this look after so long.
One of the important things we wanted to establish in this film series from the beginning is there's a sense of observed reality. We want to make sure that these spaces, even when they're in nowhere, we want to make sure that they feel real. If we have real places, we're going to have real situations. If we have real situations and real characters and real places, then when something really bad goes wrong, it's going to be a really scary situation. We needed stakes and consequences to this film. So we have sort of our guiding principles here. We have our comic books, we have Miles and his family, and this idea of observed reality. So even when it comes to designing something as simple as that bodega, we actually took a trip to Brooklyn and spent a lot of time hanging out in bodegas. I didn't realize this. I'm from Toronto. It's the East Coast city, but our bodega system is very different. I didn't realize you can get like spaghetti and meatballs in a bodega, right? Like these are important things to know as a filmmaker. I grew up eating beef patties, so I knew about that, but just all the little idiosyncrasies that make this place true, because that's who Miles is. He is a product of his environment. He would appreciate and celebrate these things. So we're getting all the details. We're catching all the vibes. Now let's talk about set design for a second. I consider set design to sort of be the first, the playground and a character that's going to interact with our performance. And so when starting any set, I sit down with directors, do some thumbnailing, and quickly go into doing 3D. For all you incredible 3D modelers out there, you can pick your jaws up off the floor now as you look at my incredible 3D modeling skills.
Don't beat yourself up.
No, but what's important here is this is about iteration. And what we're doing is basically, if this were a live action film, I'd be like walking around with tape and a tape measure and laying out a set. Oh, there's going to be a bookshelf here or a cash register here. So the actors, when they reach for something, they have something. Watching the performance, reacting to the performance to create a set that is not just a backdrop, but is a character of this scene. And so understanding the needs of the performance is very vital, and reacting to it. The set is never done until the performance is sorted out. Thinking performance, performance, performance. From there, what we do is we take those 3D renders and we start to paint on top, bringing in all those details we found in that trip from Brooklyn to the bodega, all the little details we're going to stick in that are part of Miles, that are part of the cruise experiences, putting their names in. I got the little maple syrup coming in from Toronto there. All these little details and gags, who's watching, what on TV, all these little things to get that reality in there. And we love to bring details into space. We want them to feel authentic, right? We want that observed reality we talked about. And so making sure that it's a Jamaican bodega, making sure that menu is just right. Ziggy, who's running the place, he's got the right posters up, you know. all the products that you'd find in there. Look, there's Lasker's toothpaste. Lots of little crew shout outs throughout the film. There's all these Spider-Man Easter eggs, but I'd love to look at all the crew Easter eggs as well. You know, from Miles's perspective, he's a teenager. What does life feel like as a teenager? It feels like everyone's talking about you. Well, every newspaper in the world is talking about him. So we're adding that sort of pressure onto him as well. And as well as the beef patty, you know, that I don't get to do a lot of prop design anymore as a production designer, much to my chagrin, because it's one of my favorite jobs. But I made sure to get the beef patty just right. We went out.
It got a lot of attention.
We went out and got beef patties.
Just to do our due diligence.
Yeah, you gotta get those beef patties and to be right. Company expense. So we're adding all that detail in, getting all the details, the gags, all that fun stuff, that authenticity. And then what we do is we send it down the pipeline. Although I like to consider it more like the particle accelerator.
Yes.
Because we're not going in one direction. We are going around and around and around. And so we take a painting like this and deliver it to ImageWorks, and this is what we get back. And it's not like I shouldn't say we send it away and get it back, because we're there in lockstep the whole way, making sure everything feels right. And we go around and around and around. And as we go, we get faster and better. And we draw on top and we add new textures. Oh, we didn't think that it was going to look like that in 3D. And so we start, the relationship here starts to get very strong.
And I think what's interesting, once we get to this point, we're putting cameras into the space. We're getting the high-res models in there, all of the texture. We're starting to light it. We're sort of learning. So getting to that point was almost a jumping off point.
Yeah.
Now we're in a real environment. We're also experimenting with our render script. This was one of our first environments when we started the show. So we wanted to take the render styling that we developed into the Spider-Verse, get it in here and bring it to the next level. And here you can see with these renders, they're full-on styled. You've got dots, you've got overexposure, you've got lights. So you're really figuring a lot out in this space.
And I think it speaks to the benefit of the two teams working together, is that we don't just, I'm done with it and it's yours. I hate this idea that I'm just making concept art. Now, the goal is to make the film look like the art, and the goal of the art is to make it look like the film. And this thing is not an art book. It is not a VES presentation. It is a film, first and foremost, and always. And so the goal of making the film look the best means we got to get into the film.
And the ultimate key with everything we're doing is, you know, we have 3D and we have 2D, and they come together and create something new. And what that new thing is like this. It's really the art that we're creating in the end. It's what shows up on screen. And what's cool about here, another camera angle, you're seeing things in different ways. How reflective is the glass? You know, do we need another bag of or another Canadian
maple syrup box?
Right.
Yeah. Even when it's just a guy stuck in the floor, we take it serious.
Right. So this was actually our first shot that had one of Spot's portals. So we used this to develop our tech, and we had to figure out, how does his spots, what do they look like? How do they integrate with the environment? We worked very closely with visual development and how it would distort the floor. But this is a real landmark shot for us. And you actually see how it's coming up and grabbing the bodega owner and almost pulling him down into the floor. So when we got into it, we had to figure out how we're going to make these ink spots. So we started experimenting with a software called Rebel, which is a third-party 2D painting software. And we saw tested that, we're like, wow, this is going to be perfect for us. So we brought it into our pipeline and just started experimenting. These are just some really rough tests of artists drawing curves and emitting ink off of them. Once we figured out our portals, we had to do timing tests to see how fast the ink would go, how slow it would go. And we also had to make them loopable, because sometimes you'd have a portal that would be on screen for a long time. So we had to make sure the ink would just keep moving. And we used many different simulations, a few different techniques, but you saw these portals all over the film, so they really had to look good. This is a typical shot where we'd have a portal, and what was really cool is we created this turpentine layer that sort of bridged the portal to the environment, and it made it look like the portal was stripping the paint off of the render. And it was a really cool visual technique.
Yeah, well, one of our artists, we were actually doing traditional, not on a computer, paintings of the floor tiles for the bodega, and we started putting ink into it, and it just didn't blend at all, and it didn't feel like it was part of the environment. And so we started pulling out turpentine and mixing out and seeing what would these materials, these traditional materials, how would they actually react? And we don't have to be dogmatic about them, but it teaches us something and a valuable tool that we could then use and replicate.
And what's interesting is Spot is like the absence of the render. He's like the render's been erased and it's being redrawn, and this sort of plays into that.
He's the antithesis of the Spider-Verse in a lot of ways. Yeah.
This is just the portal by itself without the background. And then here you can see a lot of these inking techniques come together with this awesome shot of Spot near the end of the film. You can see all the ink emitting off of all of his detail. And this, I'll just let this run. So you can see, so beyond the inking, we have a lot of other techniques that we use, and we can emit this ink off of geometry. And we've used Blender for some of the lines and effects geometry, and very complex character. But those inking techniques all really came together from Spot as he transitioned from the beginning of the movie to the end.
And I think there's an interesting graphic or two there that speaks to something that I think we do that's kind of unique, which is we don't know where the movie is going always once we get started, or even when we're in the middle at times.
Right.
And so Mike and his team and myself and my team were always thinking of possibilities and options. So you would always come back to us. I would say we might need all these things. You come back with this menu. We'd always call them a menu. We get these nice images of menus. You're like, let's use that, this, and this for this case, and then we'll use those, and this later. So we have all these tools. We're building tools. We're building options. We're building possibilities, and then feeding that back into the storytelling of it all to enhance it and push it further and give the directors, producers, writers, storyboarders, animators, everybody these tools to push their performances.
You really, and that's the key term, pushing it. You never want to be complacent. You always want to push beyond what you think is possible. Go too far, because if you go too far, you're going to see things that might work once you pull back and when you're looking for your final look. But that's really the key for all of this, is just really go too far and push things.
Yeah, it's a ladder of creativity that we are all walking up together and discovering what our potential is. Okay, but the unique challenge of this film is that it's not really one film, but it's actually 6 unique films put together. And as we travel across the Spider-Verse, those same principles are going to apply. We go to the world of Gwen Stacy's world in Chelsea, New York, Earth 65. And we wanted to, again, go back to and pay homage and what is that experience of the comic book? It's different, a little different in Gwen's world. She's a different character. So Spider-Woman, aka Gwen Stacy, was created by Jason Latour and Robbie Rodriguez in 2014. And we're inspired by these fantastic, colorful, and expressive comic book covers from her series. I think this was the audience's first real attachment to the character. And these would become the guide to her world and her emotions. But we wanted to push, right? We want to push and go back to the core of the idea of who she is. And so we wanted to aim beyond what those covers did, what they aspirationally were trying to become. The comic books, you know, unfortunately are done usually under harsh deadlines and have to move quick. And we've got a little bit more time, and we want to go a little further and achieve what it feels like in one's mind's eye to experience these comic books. And so we decided to lean further into the wet and a wet medium, the streakiness, where colors can flow freely, just like Gwen's emotions. That watercolor feeling is what would represent the emotional fluidity of Gwen and her world. She is this mood ring. Her emotions are exploding out of her and leaking into her world and taking over as her point of view changes emotionally from this to that to hot to cold. We want all that experience to be right on screen.
And this was actually one of the first pieces of references that we saw on the ImageWorks side of how this world would look. So it really, especially that one on the right, I still think about that painting and just thinking, how are we going to achieve this, and what rule sets are we going to set up, and how are we going to live in this environment?
And so that's a great theory. Now, how do we put that into practice? Now, I will work with the team and reduce that idea down into a small set of mark-making sort of guidelines. We don't like the word rules, but guidelines. And so we need this emotional fluidity, this wet into wet. We're gonna create Photoshop brushes that do that and have this guideline here that we can pass off to ImageWorks and all the artists to represent, to help represent this world on screen. The smudging, the watercolor, the more traditional line work. Gwen's sort of an old soul, right? We wanted her to feel a little less digital, so we're going to go with that more pencil style line work. while still maintaining that graphic sensibility and design language that's so iconic to those covers, right? Creating a world in which it's fluid and we don't respect geometry. We don't respect the lighting from shot to shot. It's all emotionally driven here because, as I know, when I was a young teenage girl and my emotions took me over, that's what the world truly feels like and looks like from someone's perspective. And so we start painting, right? We're painting and we're painting and we're doing exploration. We're trying to find the right feeling and the emotionality. And eventually we get to a piece that we feel really satisfied with. And that's when we do our handoff and start this conversation about Gwen's world with the ImageWorks team.
And what was so great about this image is that this is really, I think, the best target we had for sort of a final look for the world. And what's interesting about Gwen's world is there are a lot of different types of things happening. You have more graphic areas, you have more wet on wet, you've got some outlining. And what was great about this image that I think Dean painted.
Peter Chan.
Oh, Peter Chan, sorry. But this was just a great target. So what we did is we created this in 3D and created this test shot right here, this little performance test. And when we did this, we had to kind of figure out, what are we even looking at in this painting? Is that white coming through the window? Is that the absence of paint? Is that a light shaft coming in? Where do all these brushes live in 3D space? So once we got this test done, it was a really, really good sort of first dive into this world. So we were all really, really happy about this. And also the line work on characters, where do shadows fall in depth.
And you know, one thing that I think people think while we're making these movies, and I've even been victim to this idea while making them, is the directors or the producers or the production designer or the VFX soup, they know what the answers are. And we gave you that painting and you asked all those questions and we're like, that's a really good question.
Right.
Let's discover the answers together. We are all in it to discover it together. And that having people you can work with and trust to be vulnerable enough to say, I don't know, let's find out together and break it together is very valuable in filmmaking. And that trust and respect is paramount to making something that's never been seen before, where you need 1,000 people to come together and do it.
It's exactly right. And it's when the camera starts moving, that's when you go from it being a painting to a living world.
That's when our ideas on the philosophical hit the real world and shit hits the fan.
Right, exactly. So Gwen Stacy's universe was the first world that we developed. Let's see, this should play. We knew we were going to devote a large amount of time to this world, so we built a lot of new tech from the ground up. We created tools that would allow artists to literally paint millions of brushstrokes in the scene, filling up volumes with paint and paint along edges. It was a very manual tool we invented also. It was the most challenging look in the film because no two shots were the same, like Patrick is saying, and virtually every shot was a unique painting. Gwen's world is expressive and it's based on her mood, like a mood ring. She's hyper-focused on the present moment, so anything beyond her attention fades into an abstract wash of color. The final overall look is a combination of wet on wet watercolor and sketchy line work. This is an early test shot we did of just Gwen in her bedroom, always trying to move the camera, trying to come up with a rule set. This was an early test. Let's see if this one plays. It's not. Just trying to figure out what color shadows, how they work, where things fall.
And a lot of this is the tool building,
yes,
again, to give us that menu of options.
So here you can see we're going through a lot of different looks, experimenting, looking at the visual development artwork, trying to match it, coming up with ideas. And we ended up building two really good brushing tools called the stroke system and the curve system in Nuke. And it would allow artists to actually literally paint into the scene so many brush strokes, and then also with a curve system, be able to paint manually along edges, because you always need that hand of the artist. You don't want it to feel procedural. You want it to feel like it's really being painted by a person. We also had to figure out things like depth of field. Depth of field is one of the hardest things to figure out in these new worlds. You don't want to look at it. You want to guide the audience's eye with focus. So that we had to figure out. And things like brush strokes and movement. When a character moves, you don't want things to be locked down. You want them to come alive. So we figured out how to sort of animate brushes based on performance.
Now, you've heard us say Gwen's a mood ring. Now, what do we mean by that? It's that her, remember those mood rings with the little card you used to get back in the day, you put your thumb on it and it'd be red. That was us for most of the last year of Spider-Verse. We want that emotionality right on screen. And we wanted to, again, make that connection to the comic book. So many of the palettes were inspired directly from the comics. They're never logical, but always emotionally driven. She's a mood ring. While the movie starts and her band, I'm sure, is playing some mellowed out, vibey stuff. She is hot. She's thinking about Miles. She's thinking about all the things that are happening in her life. And so we're going to put her in red. Let's brighten her up. She's emitting light. She's not connecting with her environment. She's disconnected from the world and bringing that heat. As she goes home, this warm home that her father's trying to provide for her. He's trying really hard to make this relationship work without knowing all the complications, of course, behind it. Gwen is cold. She's depressed. She's cold to the bone. Let's have her in a wash of blues and cool purples as she comes into this warm space. And then as she goes into her bedroom, she's in an analogous place. That's her space. That's her safe space. And she wants it to be depressing. Again, she's the 16-year-old girl. Or I guess she might be 18 at this point in time. No, 16 at this point in time. Anyways, now dad feels that, but he wants to bring the warmth into the space. He's trying to make this connection with her. And as they hug, that warmth spreads from him to her and flows into the room. It changes her environment, as any nice warm hug will.
And one thing I'll say is, it's really tricky to have a character that's colored differently than the rest of the environment, and to not look like it's just sort of she's been painted that color. We tried to use light to tell a lot of the story, the color story, and really still try to get her to integrate, even though she was a different color than what the lights in the environment would do.
Yeah, unfortunately, just doing the thing literally doesn't work. We are in search of what does that feeling look like? And feelings are very nuanced and very complex.
So a lot of those shots where she's blue in the previous slide in the environment really took a lot of iterations to make it look convincing.
Yeah, because the first time it was like, wait, does she have blue skin?
Exactly.
Did she become a Smurf?
Right.
It's Sony IP. It makes sense. It's
hey, I watched some
crossover
Smurf movies. That's
exactly.
Great.
So, what Gwen is this hyper-focused character on her emotions. And in the confrontation with her dad at the end of the sequence in the fight in the Guggenheim, her emotions just completely overwhelm her and consume the space. When they're fighting, when you're in a fight with somebody you love, nothing else matters in the world. The walls don't matter. They're your only two people in the world. The set literally disappeared. In this sequence, it's no longer relevant to the conversation at hand. When she looks at her father, she sees an unrecognizable figure. The chaos and the emotionality is plastered on the wall behind him, and moving in Z space because it looks silly when we put it right flat behind him. But she sees this unrecognizable figure. He's no longer her father. It's this cop that's coming to get her. And when he looks at her, all he can see is the mask that he's been chasing for so long. This is not his daughter anymore. It's the vigilante who killed one of his friends.
And here you can see an example of sort of a raw render versus the final look. And you can see we're using our Rebel for drips. We're using our brushing. We're hand painting brushes on George here. This section of Gwen's World was actually the first shots we finalized. And we actually called it Gwen Vision at the time as the world all melted away. And here are just some other examples of, we always try to use multiple techniques for things, not relying on one. So here we're using more of a shader technique to break up drips. And here are just a few really cool tests and some final shots of the dripping background. Again, it's going abstract with the background. Everything's melted away, trying to become experimental with brushes and dripping. And you'll see in some of the shots coming up, using it to enhance emotion. I mean, this background is totally wild, completely detached. And then here we have brushes emitting out of or from behind Gwen to really enhance her emotion. We gave our artists libraries of drips so they could lay into the comp. Every shot has dripping paint. This is an early test for portals, which I got so excited about. And then, like I talked about earlier, here's our final portal. And we use our ink and our brushing in different ways. But yeah, and we try to use tools across different universes for different ways. And this was a really cool one of all the ink coming off of spot. And this was a really amazing test very early on that got everyone excited, where all of our tool sets were coming together. This was a performance test of spot. And I still love looking at these and wondering, how did we do this? But it's really just the work of a lot of artists putting all their talents in.
And again, putting that feeling on screen.
Mm-hmm.
What does that feeling truly look like? Back to Gwen and her father, as they're pulling apart, they're becoming more obscured. They become less recognizable to each other. That background we talked about, we wanted that disconnect. Excuse me, everyone. The total aggression in the paint strokes speaks to the rage that they're having towards each other. That feeling is being put on screen with the mark maker.
And what was good is we figured out a lot of these techniques early in production, so it really paid dividends later when Gwen comes back home and confronts her father again. We had a lot of these tools and tech set.
She's overcome with this sadness, and just like at the start of the talk about Gwen, right, that blue comes welling back up into her. She's consumed by these blue depressive feelings. And so let's put that metaphor right on screen. We're going to be honest with our feelings and put them out there for the audience. And we were really worried that we were being maybe too heavy-handed or too literal with our metaphors. But once you're sitting there and you got the music going by Pemberton that's blowing your mind, you got your popcorn, your friends, you're taking it all, and we realize we actually need to be a little heavy-handed with these metaphors, and they're going to land and show that vulnerability to the audience, and they're going to accept it.
I think one last thing about it is, a lot of these really creative shots, you don't really know how they're going to truly play until you have a lot of them done, and you actually watch it back. The whole section of Gwen and her father at the end of the Guggenheim sequence, we actually did twice, because once we watched it back and we realized, oh, this shot doesn't quite work in the run, we want to go more abstract there. So when you're getting really creative with this type of thing, you know, it's not just a painting, it's a series of paintings for every shot, and they all have to play together in an ideal way.
It's very much bespoke art house blockbuster filmmaking.
That's what it is.
As our journey continues, we go to the world of Mumbattan, Earth 50101. For this, we wanted to go back and explore a character that was much loved, but I didn't think had the greatest execution ever. There's a very intriguing idea there, and we just wanted to go a little further with it. So we love the character of Spider-Man India, but wanted to place it a little bit more into an authentic space. And we went back, right? That experience of what was the comic book like? Well, what was it like growing up in India? And we found this incredible publishing company called Intrajal Comics. They've been publishing comics for forever, since I think the 40s. We found this online library where somebody, thank God, scanned every single one in. I've read thousands of Indian comic books now. And what's really interesting is it's sort of the same but different, right? They're doing the same technique, and yet they're doing it their own way. Their printing standards might be a little more laxed back in the day. And so you're getting a lot of sort of off-registration, things that we can leverage for storytelling, but also just their color palettes, what the world looks like and feels with them, that more calligraphic style of ink work, just that comes from their culture. We want to accept and explore and celebrate everything that made them different. And we bring that into the rendering of the character, that sort of extreme offsetting, the larger dots, because the printing isn't as good. The fact that they always seem to be on different paper stock, which I found to be wildly fantastic. And so even Pav, our Spider-Man India, has different paper stocks for different part of his suit, and we would take that throughout the world. Our incredible designer Jesus did these really expressive designs of the character and really started to bring him to life. And we worked with people in the Indian community and comic book artists, and just people within the community as well as I mean, the hundreds of people on the team that are Indian, to make sure that this character felt authentic. It wasn't a parody of anything, but something that would be a true representation and a celebration of this character. We didn't turn the volume down on this one.
This is actually our final model of Pavitra right here, and you can see his hair and his costume. And then this was a really amazing piece of art that I feel like you guys landed on, that ended up being our guide for the look of the world.
Yeah, we were exploring the world a lot, the world of Mumbattan, and Zach Bretz, one of the artists from the first film, had now come back onto the second film and really nailed this style, this idea of the off registration, the misaligned line work, the plates, you know, comic books, everything that's printed is printed in these series of plates. You have your cyan, magenta, yellow, and black plates. Well, here somebody knocks the table a little bit, or the plates have been misaligned, and you get this great misalignment. Michael spoke about depth of field.
Oh, yeah.
Depth of field. Depth of field is this thing that doesn't exist in comic books because you don't really need it. But to tell a story cinematically, we do. And so looking to the comic books and seeing that extreme off registration as a way of defocusing the background.
And just like we did in Gwen's world and Miles' world, we have to reinvent filmmaking techniques every single time with every world. And we poured over these paintings, breaking them down. What are we looking at here? How are we going to do this? Look how the buildings simplify the background to the overexposed sky. Look at the color in the delimiter between the shadow and the light, and how the line work gets really thick close to camera and thin as it goes back. So lots of things for us to analyze and figure out.
And so we're executing well on our first principle, which is paying homage and the experience the audience has with the comic book. But now let's talk about what is Miles's point of view, POV of this space, right? This is a whole new exciting world. He didn't even know you could really travel through the Spider-Verse or what it would be like to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And now he's in this New York meets Mumbai. Crazy amounts of traffic, skyscrapers on top of skyscrapers. It's a dizzying array. The experience from Miles is overwhelming, and the details are almost too much to take in. And so we wanted to put that even into the design, the overlapping colors, the head on a swivel feeling. What does that look like? And that's what we're trying to represent here by taking all those principles and layering and making it feel that feeling of overwhelming. Well, that's what the audience needs to have, and that's what we're going to create on screen.
And here you can see a very early test shot that we did of this marketplace in Mumbattan before we had animation, before we had final models. It was really just taking that painting and trying to recreate it. That's always the first thing we do. And then we move the camera, because like you were describing, there's paper texture, there are big dots, there's loose line work. What happens to the paper texture when the camera moves? Yeah, we have to figure it out, because everything has to exist in 3D, but still feel like a 2D painting.
There's a big part of this relationship, which is me walking into a room and being like, I really hope this idea is going to work. And then it breaks. And we kind of have a saying like, break it fast.
Exactly.
And we break it fast together, and then we fix it, because we know the ideas are good, but the execution's the true challenge here.
And what makes it so challenging is we have to build new tools. And with India, and across all of our worlds, but India really required a robust line tool. So we created a line tool called Kismet that we use across all the worlds, and it's a Houdini tool. An artist can tweak parameters to any look they want. There's a lot of control for line off, for offsetting off the surface, for breakup, for width variation. Very, very powerful. And this control is integral because it gave artists the power to adjust things on a per shot basis, so no two shots were the same. This is one of our early tests right here. You can see the lines sort of drawing in, drawing on, and adding detail. You can also see how the lines are in the shadows. We can connect to the light, so the lines become the shadow, which is really cool. Here are some other really early tests. So on the left was VizDev artwork, and on the right, we just grabbed an Audi from our library. And we're trying to use that line tool to make it feel similar. And then India, it's very loose. Here's another test, even looser. So we're like, how sketchy can we get? So this tuk-tuk on the left was a very sketchy drawing. Can we take our taxi from Miles's world and do the same thing? And you can see we're actually displacing the geometry. We have line work coming off. So these tests were really, really exciting. Here's another one.
And what I love about this line work, and what's so essential about this line work, is it's not rough drawing for rough drawing's sake. This is, we asked artist Kellen Jett, draw as if you're standing on a street corner. Mm-hmm. And these cars are ripping by. You've only got a moment to capture the detail. The feeling of being there, witnessing the world, needs to be in the mark make.
Right. And then here is a test shot we did of our India environment just with previs geometry. And we started to figure out what paper texture does. How do we block color? And that's one of the biggest things in India when looking at the Indriel comics. is how does color block together? How does it layer? Because they did follow certain rules in the Indrojal comics. Here's a shot from our first teaser where we started to figure out a lot of the line work. And here, as you see these breakdowns of every shot here, one of our biggest challenges was the density of India, and how do you read performance over such a dense environment. We always wanted to try to simplify behind the characters so the performance could come through, but always also layer the colors back so they made sense. And I mean, this is a one crazy environment with a lot of simplification needed.
One of the challenges was in this almost antiquated style for a world, we still needed like effects. And we got to this point where like, oh boy, what are the effects going to look like? Water can't look like real water, and yet it needs to feel like water. What did they do in the comic books? And Phil Lord, our executive producer, always, whenever I'd get lost, he'd always remind me, look to the comics, remember who we're making this film for. It's to pay homage to that comic book experience. So we'd go back to the source. I was pouring through those thousands of comic books, looking to see how did they handle things like water, explosions, space, smoke, all these details, pulling them out. Nothing in an animated film is free. It all has to come from a thought, a decision, a choice.
Nothing happens.
Nothing just happens. And so there's hundreds of artists waiting, eager to do something, but they need to all be going in the same direction. And so going back, looking to, and what we realize is that simplification. This is a world, like you were saying, that's so busy, it's so dense, all this crazy stuff. What we would do to create explosions and fear within this space is take that away, take all that dizzying detail away, and simplify it even more, reduce it and take the beauty of this world away from itself.
And what's great about these comics is they provide a really good target for our effects team, because effects, almost more than any other department, is you really need concrete targets. Or I think you can spin, you can kind of cycle around and try to figure out what your end game is, and having these targets was really useful.
And the default is you've got great technology that'll make you a photoreal explosion,
right?
But that's not what we want.
And here you can see in these tests, all of our simulations start out like live action visual effects movies. We start out with volumetric smoke simulations, and effects tend to be one of the harder things to stylize. So here you can see we're actually layering our line work into the smoke, simplifying the detail. And here you can see the loose line work over the background and how much of a part it played in this Mumbattan environment.
I wonder if effects is sort of hamstrung from decades of trying to create the photoreal.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so not behind, but there hasn't been that stylized representation that these films need.
Well, yeah, and it's tricky because everything's moving in a simulation, and we're not creating a very 2D looking simulation either. It's something in between. You still want that volumetric feel, but stylized.
It has to feel scary.
And what does line work do in smoke? Does it pop around? How long does it last? You know, before the lines change. So there's a lot of tricky things to figure out when it comes to Sims.
These are we would of course spend most of the day together, but we would just go for coffee weekly and have to have these conversations. So we can't do a regular explosion.
Right.
What are we going to do? And what does an explosion feel like? What do we need to hang on from a real explosion? And what do we need to bring from the comic book so it feels like the true experience?
And it has to integrate into the final look of the rest of the frame. So that explosion needs to sit with everything else.
We ask a lot of questions of
Yes.
each other. Yeah. Okay, one of our absolute favorites. It's your boy, Spider-Punk. Usually there's a huge round of applause. I'm assuming everyone's going nuts at home. And Spider-Punk lives in this London style of architecture at a New York scale, right? It's our new old, I can't remember, new old London or old York, new old York, old York. We, while we're making the film, we have like 1,000 names for things, and then we have to figure it out for the world. But we want to go back to the core of what is punk, right? Not just the comic books, because I think the comic books are a representation of the punk scene. And so we went back and looked at these zines and album covers and posts, flyers on the wall that have been wheat pasted up for the Sex Pistols, My Chemical Romance, Misfits, Black Flag, and take that same experience. This is a art form that is about rejection. It's about I think, a minimalist approach, an aggressive approach, an expressive approach. And so the first round of artwork that was created was making art the same way they would have made the art. I had actually taken some time off between the two films and went to London. So I had a ton of photos and started cutting up photos from my London trip and Xeroxing them back together and taping cutouts from magazines on top, and then coloring them with the limited palette that you got from that era. It's walking a mile in the artist's shoes. You know, it's how did they create these things? Taping things back together, leaving razor blades in the photocopier. And these weren't necessarily even about story moments. We were still discovering the story at this time, but trying to get that feeling. And I need to learn. It's almost like learning a new language. I remember one of the producers being like, how come the artwork doesn't look like the reference very early on? I was saying the complicated thing here is not only are you trying to learn a new language, but then you're trying to learn how to tell a joke in it, basically, or tell a story in it. And that is very complicated. So we almost had to do like our Duolingo style learning and just practice making art like those artists did. And eventually it all started to come together. I took shots from the old film, photos from my trip, album covers, and then this sort of fucked off. I'm looking at the PR people, the fucked off drawing style that says it's punk and I don't care and it's on screen and deal with it.
What was that? I missed that.
Yeah. That attitude needed to be present on screen, much as it was in our character. He has that energy, that paint splatter, just that attitude that he is cooler when he takes his mask off. He's as cool as he can be because he just doesn't care what you think about him.
And punk's all about breaking the rules, right?
Yeah.
And this character in this world, I feel like maybe our most pushed world is arguable. And here you can see these turntables of Hobie and the line work and how it redraws. His line work is very pushed. It's very graphic. And the trick with line work is you don't want it to feel locked down. As characters move, as they perform, it's really integral for it to feel natural. One other cool thing we did in this world with Hobie specifically is he had a lot of different looks.
Yeah.
And this contact sheet was given to us by the art department that was painted over an early test that we did of Miles as Hobie before we had the Hobie design.
Yeah, Kevin Emmerich, one of the early artists and did fabulous work throughout the film, but took and broke down all these different album covers and applied them as different render scripts to the character, again, as this menu that we were going to order up from ImageWorks.
And what was really interesting about this character that I think is really the first time we'd ever done it was that his look was driven by animation. So we would create these looks in look dev based off of the art department. And then we gave animation the ability to select the look of Hobie to play into his performance. So in this breakdown, you can see he has paper cut edges that are from the Kismet line tool. He's got the line tools themselves. He looks very cut out. And then you have all these different look options. So it'll scroll through a bunch of them here. And animation could change them. They could change just the guitar or his vest or his whole body, depending on the performance. And here you can see it all together. And the trick with Hobie is he looks cut out, but we still want him to integrate. He doesn't belong in any of the worlds, but we still have to light him and put him into the scenes like any other character.
You know, and a reason to give that power to the animators as to what he looks like is his look is part of his performance. Mm-hmm. At times he would become part of the scene and sort of fall back as we're pushing it on Miles or Gwen on an important shot. But then at times Hobie needs to interrupt. Right. He's a shit disturber. He wants to be the problem. Mm-hmm. And so his palette will change to be complementary or the opposite of the lighting in the scene. And he won't fit in purposely because he doesn't want to.
Exactly.
Another world that we explored that is behind us right now, and this one, again, was very close to my heart, was the world of Nueva York. This is the world in which Spider-Man 2099 it lives in, and this character was created by Peter David and Rick Leonardi, who's the nicest man in the world. He came on and helped us out for a while. It created in 1992, and it captured sort of this idea of what the future was. This future based on the idea of the 70s, 80s stylization of those futurist concept artists. From Miles's point of view, Miguel represents this idea of an authority figure. he is overseeing this world, and as long as everything goes, as long as everyone listens to him and does exactly what he says, everything's going to be all right. Okay, everybody. He's this authoritarian parental figure who's trying to be in control of everything. And so when it comes to the design of that, what is the architectural style of this world? We started to look into a lot of brutalist architecture for its connection to authoritarian regimes throughout the world. There's this complexity to it. There is this coldness to it. It's extremely strong, but it's extremely cold. It much like how Miguel sees the world. It's stark, it's sharp, it's regimented, right? This is who Miguel is, and his world needs to reflect that. It's exacting, it's mathematical, it's oppressive. And so we went and looked back again to the origins of where that style of that future that Rick Leonardi and Peter were looking for. And we went back to those futurists, right? These were the industrial designers turned concept artists, the Sid Meads of the world, right? They sat there working with a T-square and a ruler, being exact and mathematical and precise with the materials they had at the time, the markers, the ink, and the pen, bringing all those materials and putting them on our desks and using those as our toolkits. It's that mathematical geometry, the rigidness of it that we were so interested in, as well as this sort of aspirational idea of what the future could be, expressive brushstrokes. This work by Sid Mead and John Berkey, Joe Johnston really became the guiding principles for our future, knowing that it represented this sort of old guard, right? If Miguel is this authoritarian figure from Miles's point of view, then he does represent the old guard. And for all the artists working on this project, we looked up to these incredible artists, and yet they do represent yesterday, and we are the artists of tomorrow. It's that outdated idea of the elder statesman that we love and aspire, just like Miles, to be a part of their pantheon, and now we need to go beyond and do something new. This is one of the first pieces we did that really brought all these ideas together, but now we needed to break down these principles and start creating all the tools we would use to create the world. We used the same industrial design process that the artists would have used back in that day today. And we actually brought on a friend of mine, John Bell, who's the art director on Back to the Future 2. This guy's been started as a concept car designer way back in the day, and he showed us his approach to making this artwork.
And what was so amazing about this was this informed us how we were going to create the images, the final images. We wanted to do it the same way the artist did.
Yeah, so understanding not just the materials, but the process. And I'm just going to let this play one more time, starting with that blue pencil line. And I think some of the younger artists had to explain why were they even using blue pencils, because they're non-photo blue, they don't photocopy. And then inking and on top, then painting on top. The markers, these are all the tools as we're searching for our cinematic and artistic design language. We're finding it in the process those artists had.
Yeah, so basically this was the first asset we worked on for the look of this world. It's our first exploration into what it would look like to take the brushes and the markers that Sid Mead would use in the concept art and apply it to a moving 3D model. This little guy taught us so much about how look dev would collaborate with look of picture also, so that each of their contributions to the final image support each other, because we're texturing, we're look deving, but then we're also adding this look of picture treatment. And you can see even in this lineup here, we're experimenting with deconstruction and kind of reducing the render back to the ink lines and the blue pencil. And this was really a landmark test shot for us, where we used previs geometry, an older version of Miguel, but we figured out how brushstrokes were gonna, and I'll just play this one more time. You can see at the beginning here, we've got the blue pencil, the ink line, and we're building up the look of the world. And we're seeing how brushstrokes relate to spec and reflection and how things deconstruct in depth. So this was really, really useful. And then here's just a really cool, some slides of some look dev that we did in the underbelly of 2099. And we barely spent any time down there.
But we built it.
But we built it. So I'm showing it off.
Yeah.
And these were some really, really cool look dev renders. And what was interesting is, how does this world look in the dark? What do lines do? Are they lighter? Are they darker? How do puddles look? How do glows look? And how are they broken up? So I was really, really excited to see this world. And here are just some other tests of some other characters using some of the line tools we created and how Kismet interpolates between frames. Here's Miguel. He had his own rules, lines for his character. He's got lines off his shoulder, along his profile. Here you can see how they redraw when he moves. Like I was saying, you don't want anything to be locked down. And here you can see that really cool framework we created on his face.
Yeah, it's that industrial design approach to designing even him. He has this underlying structure he cannot break away from.
Right.
And he cannot change who he is to his core. That is the structured, regimented individual. And that's why you can't see the world from Miles's eyes.
And here is just another shot showing our layered ink in the background and how close it was to the artwork that we were referencing. We really spent a lot of time, and shot after shot, it really pays dividends, I think, for the look of the world.
And I think peeling these layers back for the audience, for you all at home looking at it, it's like when you see the shot, you just feel that stuff.
Mhm.
Not everything is apparent there, but the craftsmanship, the hard work, those details are felt. Maybe not seen, but felt, and it brings that style to life.
And that's the thing, we're not doing just to do it. It plays into the style. It all adds up to the final image.
Yeah. Now the problem with creating a spider society is you need to create like a lots of spiders, like a lot of spiders, like so many spiders.
There's a Canadian in there.
Oh yeah, somewhere.
And but yeah, like I said earlier, we created a new crowd system so we could literally create hundreds of spider characters, and we could create different body proportions, colors, logos. We gave animation a lot of control. And as you watch the film, in every shot, you will see tons and tons of these characters. And here are just some examples.
Yeah, a little roll call, but we'd be in shots and we'd be like, we need more spiders. And you're like, there's 75 spiders back there. We need more spiders.
I think we have like maybe 300 on the train there that
Yeah.
we got at least.
So a little roll call of some of our favorites. We got a web slinger based off of a Mobius style Blueberry, the Mobius comic book Blueberry. One of another personal favorite in the film. I got so many personal favorites at the film. I keep saying it, but we needed a new spider person, and I got charged with coming up with one. And I am Canadian, and so many of our filmmakers are Canadian, and so we made this Spider Woman Canada, who is based on the 72 Summit Series jersey when Candle single-handedly saved Western society from the communist onslaught.
And she's in a lot of shots.
Oh, she's in a lot of shots. Yeah. The issue was, so Phil was like, make us a new Spider-Man. So myself and Chris Anka designed this, and then we turned it over. And since, like 70% of the crew is in Canada, she kept showing up in every shot. Like she'd show up in a shot, and then there'd be a turnaround, and she'd be in the background. And she was sort of everywhere to the point where it was like, all right, everybody, we get it.
Up on the Spider Canada.
We get it. Canadians are very proud people. She can't be everywhere all at once. We got a manga Spider-Man. We got a Sun Spider. This is a really interesting story. A fan reached out after the first film and pointed out there were no people with physical disabilities. There's no physically othered spider personas, and so they did a design, and it got actually accepted by Marvel. And then when we saw that, we're like, we have to get them into the film. They're an incredible character, and again, we celebrate the differences. It's all the differences between our spiders, our worlds, the filmmakers. Those are things that we value so much and want to get into this film. Ben Reilly, this was an interesting one.
This was actually our very first test for Ben Reilly. You see, he doesn't even have the logo on his chest yet. But Craig Pfeiffer, one of our really talented look dev artists, did this. And it's using a lot of the tech that we did on Miguel for a lot of the etching work for ink and how it would trace forms. But really, this is one of my favorite little shots of the whole film, this turnaround of Ben Reilly, because we were just blown away. And it was so exciting.
Yeah, this was a approved moment pretty much right out of the gate. We nailed it. And I think everybody's favorite is the this little spider kitty. I hope everyone's having a good catter day out there. Okay.
All right. This brings us to
this is actually my personal fave. Okay. I've used that saying, but my baby, this is the closest to my heart. Earth 42. This is, go ahead. Yeah.
All right, so Earth 42 is an alternate reality, a parallel universe to Earth 1610, where Uncle Aaron is still alive and Miles was never bitten by a radioactive spider. The look of Earth 42 is a noir aesthetic with color, where colors recede into blocked up shadows, and the inking style is heavy and gritty, and light gets obliterated by it. In Earth 42, Miles is the Prowler, a vigilante trained by his Uncle Aaron. These are some really cool tests, shots we did, looking at a lot of the comic reference and how line work interacts with light. Here are some early line tests we did of the two of them running on a rooftop. And here is Miles's costume. He's got a lot of really cool shoes that harken back to the Prowler from the first movie, and the mask. Those shoes have thrusters. Here is Aaron in this very inked look. Color is heightened, saturation is heightened. And yeah, we really pushed this gritty splattered look. But as you go into this world for the first time, we sort of played it down before we let the audience know that Miles was in another world. So in these earlier shots, you can see the style in there a little bit, but it's not really, that pronounced just yet. But when you go back and watch it a second time, you can see a lot of the look. And this is really pushed. You can see how we're using line work in the shadows, especially for the shadows of the windows, on the ground, on the punching bag. And now I can get into some of the finer details.
This was a world that we really wanted to feel the hard-earned aspects of it. Miles comes from our Miles, 1610 Miles, comes from this really slick, smooth world. He's got Ben-Aid dots, he's got hatching, but it all kind of feels a little traditional and yet computerized. It's modern, it's updated. This is a world where everything is done by hand. You're not buying your Zipatone dots from the store and electrosetting them on. They're going to have to be stippled on or use spray paint. The hatching is going to be done by hand and inking. And so to make this possible, we actually hand inked almost every single shot of the film. As we were going back and forth, Lasker's team would deliver shots. I would ink on top. They would break that inking down, making it texture, making it lighting renders, putting it right on the character's competence. Anything we could do to maintain that illusion that this is it is an inked comic book world.
And what's cool is over the whole film, we have hand-drawn line work in almost every world, but this one I think relied on it the most.
Yeah, this is a heavy-duty inking work. And so to do so, we went back and looked at the greats, right? The first comic that came to mind was, of course, Sin City by Frank Miller. It's just got attitude, man. It's got decision-making. It's got sort of a disregard for the audience in a way. It's just, I'm putting it down and you're dealing with it. We love the way the aggressiveness and the machismo almost of the artist here. Another artist we love, Chris Simney. These blocked up shadows, the intense detailing, and yet the then wiping out entire amounts of detail with that heavy stopped up black ink. You don't need to always see the character's face. Sometimes it's about big, strong silhouettes. Jean-Paul Leon for his incredible staging and use of positive negative space, and the complexity that would later become a problem of well, a character can be completely black in silhouette and then walk over black and turn white. These are all really difficult things to do.
How does that act in motion, right? How does the line work reveal the light?
And then, of course, Sean Gordon Murphy, incredible comic book artist. He's got this gritty, direct, confident application. That was a huge influence to the world. And so just like rewinding back to the start of the talk, talking about Gwen's world, I broke these things down into their different mark making guidelines, the way and the brushes we would use. I was taking spray paint. I went out and got new ink nibs and everything. I made a huge mess of my room at home. Getting my fingerprints literally on here. What is the hatching? What is the mark making we're going to use?
What was great about this is we could actually feed this into our tools. So we could actually paint with brushes that you're seeing here. This type of breakdown was invaluable for us.
And so let's step back for a second. When it comes to designing the sets, just before I break out my incredible 3D modeling skills, we're talking about what does the set need? What does it feel like from Miles's perspective? Where are we going to go? What are we going to do? Getting all of that into this really rough space, just like before, to discover the performance, to give animators, the storyboard artists, directors options, so they're not just standing in an empty space. But in this world, the approach is going to be a little different because I'm going to have to put myself in the seat of the inker. And so instead of going directly to paintings like I would normally do with these 3D assets, is I would ink the world. And I think this is what got me in trouble later, because then I needed to ink everything that came up.
Right.
But finding and doing the work of the inker taught me a lot of tools. If I just did a little thing, I made it perfect. Inking every shot, I needed to develop that shorthand. And that shorthand is what makes that world feel authentic. It's being done 1,000 times. So starting to not hatch in every bit of black, but I got out a much bigger brush and sort of wet into wet inked it. Spray paint, using toothbrushes to do explosive paint splatters. The light isn't going to be optical in the sense that it's going to be so volumetric, but it's going to be represented by the absence of ink or white gesso on top.
Right, the language of this world. Look at that light in the window. The glow is the ink splatter is revealing the glow, and we have to figure out where does that live? How does that act when the camera moves?
Yes, because it needs to move in 3D. We're not making a comic book here. We're making a comic book movie. After that, then moving into the painting and starting to think already, what is this world about? We haven't even, this is years before we're going to light this sequence, but starting to think, what would my local colors be like? Well, this is a world in which Spider-Man is facing off, or the scene is a Spider-Man in which the scene is about a Spider-Man facing off against Prowler. Let's get those Prowler colors right into the environment. It's a battle between that purple and green and the red and blue of a Spider-Man. Same thing, and I did this with tons of shots throughout the set, looking at different problems we're going to run into. Not only am I thinking stylistically and mood, but as I'm doing these, I'm starting to earmark, because I now know the process. Oh, lights are going to be, how are we going to represent light flares? How are we going to represent how much detail are we going to need in faces? This is going to be tricky. That's going to be tricky. How do I simplify detail? How do we keep some resolution in our deep shadows so they don't just fall off and become nothing?
How do line work and brushes interact? I mean, this was one of our first images that we tried to match.
Yeah.
The next one, which has all the color added. I mean, this was almost like our Bible for the look of this world.
And so doing that work early on, we talk a lot in design, we do lots of quick comps, but I always encourage the artist to go make a final look of picture shot early on, even if the set's going to change, the characters are going to change, to discover what that rendering, those problems and what the solutions might be to those problems.
Because in the end, this is like the jumping off point for the final look.
For making the movie, yeah. Here you can see now, fast forward a few years, we're actually getting shots back and looking at them, and I would start inking on top of them. And you can see here the inked version with a quick color key, and then this is the final shot.
Right.
And we are matching 1-to-1 as best we can, always, to get the film on screen the way it was intended, to feel that comic book ethos, and to push the medium. We don't take anything that's been done before as a guideline for what we need to do now. We are breaking down barriers and inventing new things, and that's the fun of it.
Yeah,
that's the true answer.
And once you start doing that, it's hard to do anything else. And one interesting thing about this shot is how you layer values. We needed Miles to stand out over that dark background, but everyone's supposed to be really inked. So we have to really adjust values so the characters read over the background. That foreground chain reads over the background. A lot of very intricate layering.
Yeah. So the audience can sit back and enjoy it and be absorbed into the emotionality and not be thinking about how they did it.
I mean, that chair right there and those weights, we spent so much time trying to get enough detail in there as you could tell what it was.
And then too much detail, and it was all you were looking at.
Yes. So
we've traveled from a watercolor world to that incredible Spider-Verse graphic stylized slick modern comic book, to these retro obscure Indian printing techniques, to the zine style punk posters that are Xerox, sliced apart and glued back together. From the desk of the industrial designer, and finally this dark, aggressive reflection of Miles's own greatest fears put on the screen. We used, I think, every trick in the book we could think of to tell the story the way it needed to be told, the experience what that feeling looked like on screen.
We built tons of tools. We had 1,000 artists all bringing their talents, their artistry, And the collaboration, I think, between the entire production is really the only way this type of work
The
happens.
only way to do it.
And there's a lot of failure that leads to success. And
Yeah.
you have to be willing to go through that process day in, day out to really find what your end goal is.
And so we'd love to thank you for having us today and giving us the time and just ask you the question of, so how are you going to tell your story? And so thank you very much. We can hear the applause through the Ethernet. And now, how do we, does Bobby?
Holy smokes, yeah, I'm muted. But now, yeah, thank you guys so much, man, for taking the time. I appreciate Rise Up Animation. I appreciate you, like the passion, the effort that you put into that, and holy smokes, thank you guys so much. I appreciate y'all.
Oh, our pleasure. We love talking about this stuff.
Yeah,
Dude, at some point, like me and somebody behind the scenes were like, just let them go off. And I just talk about
we go over time.
I think we're pretty over.
Yeah,
pretty
you
over.
Get in a room. We're used to spending about 5 or 6 hours together in a room, so it spirals.
This was the short version too.
Yeah.
I think we'll only keep you for one more question, guys, because we respect your time. For anyone that wants to do what you guys want to do and go down the route that you guys have kind of like accomplished for yourselves, like what advice would you give for up and coming artists? I think this is the most important thing.
So I got into a lot of trouble starting my art career because I had art professors saying you need a style, you have to stick to one thing, narrow your focus. And I ended up dropping out of illustration school at Sheridan College, moving to British Columbia, going into a film school. I didn't love that so much. I started storyboarding as an in animation. The 2008 recession happened. I started making video games, and I just love doing graffiti, print, editorial, all these things. And it's very important every artist out there gets an education in what's been done, but never to the sacrifice or detriment of who you are and what you are trying to do. And I think staying true to yourself and your vision is paramount. Now it's a collaborative media, so it means we're coming together to create a film, not my film. But when I look at portfolios, what I'm most keen in is, do you have, if you've got the skills, your portfolio lands on my desk. What I'm looking for now is, what is it about you that's unique? What is it about you that's different? That's what I want to see front and center, because I want to know how you're going to tell your story differently. And then if we come together to tell our story, what are you going to bring that's different to it? So stay true to who you are, and to spend the time as while you're learning all those awesome skills and technology, make sure you put the time aside just as importantly to understand what you like, who you are, and what you are trying to say and what your voice is, because that's what's going to separate you, in my opinion, from everybody else, and what's going to make you into a unique filmmaker to get involved in these, highly bespoke art house $100 million blockbuster films who somehow convinced the world we're going to keep making.
I mean, it's all about following your passions, following what you love, because you won't let anything stop you. And I mean, I always loved animation, CG from when I was like in middle school. I always kind of knew what I wanted to do. And in my first few jobs, I was a generalist. I did everything. I modeled, I did effects sims, lit. And I think getting that holistic view of the pipeline really helped me figure out sort of where my strengths are and what I wanted to focus on. And even as you go from smaller studios to bigger studios, the more talents you have, the more knowledge you have, will really, really help. There's nothing I love more than having an artist that really knows the cloth pipeline, but knows the lighting pipeline, because it really eases their assets through. And but yeah, I just wanted to create images that no one ever saw. I love when people see stuff and they go, wow, how did you do that? And that's just what really gets me going with this stuff. And you really just go with what you love. And that's the real secret.
Amazing. Any advice to up and comers in a industry that might be struggling a little bit?
I mean, I think there's a lot. I mean, when I was coming up, it was so hard to do any work at home. Things were so it was so hard to get my hands on the software. The computers were so expensive. I feel like now more than ever, you can do more at home at a lower budget. And I think it's just kind of just experiment, create. You don't need like super detailed work on your demo reel, your animation. If it shows weight, if you even create just like a nicely lit scene, we could see your artistry and your passion. So it's really like just back to what I said, follow what you love. And I think that will get you there eventually. And don't give up. I was the most persistent, annoying person when I started out. I like annoyed people to death trying to get jobs. And you know, that's what you got to do.
I think they made me an art director on the first film because I just kept showing up for meetings. Like that I wasn't supposed to be in. Like you couldn't keep me out of the building. When COVID ended on the second film, or ended when they let people back in the building, I was the first person here. You couldn't keep me out of the film.
Right.
And I think that passion gets recognized. Now I think the question people are wondering out there though is like, cool, I've got a banging portfolio. I know how to draw and paint. How do I get the job? And the thing it took me a while to realize is the world doesn't know you exist until you're out there. And so social media is a fantastic way of getting out there, connecting with filmmakers, of course, reaching out to Sony, recruiting, even if there's nothing going on. I got into Sony because 15 years ago, a friend of mine, I was living in Montreal. A friend of mine was here. He introduced me to somebody and he said, oh, I know a guy in animation. You guys might get along. I came onto the lot and it was Dave Bleich. I met Dave Bleich, who was a matte painter and art at ImageWorks, but then became an art director. And I met with him and we were sitting in his office and Justin K. Thompson, director of Spider-Verse Spider-Verse and production designer on the first one, was in the room as well. And he turned around and took a look at my portfolio and said, nice stuff.
Yeah.
And 5 years went by and then we finally connected. And it's little connections like that.
Personal relationships. It's kind of an unspoken thing. You can be the most talented artist in the world, but you want to make relationships with people. Yeah. And one thing leads to another.
And that was it. He became my mentor years later. And I was just like, you are teaching me how to make animated films no matter what happens. That's the agreement. And he did. And I've hired people right out of school, people I've met through the graffiti scene, and there's a family aspect to this filmmaking thing, and you want to become a part of that. And so you got to kind of show up for the family barbecues and say what's up, get to know everybody. Like Bobby, you and I met a few times randomly, and now things like this start to happen. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Get involved in your community as much as you're putting effort into yourself. Understand yourself and your portfolio.
I appreciate you. That's wonderful, man. Like, yeah, 100%. Thank you guys for being a part of this. Wonderful, wonderful, like words of wisdom, like any artist, like moving forward. All the like everyone attendees. I'm sorry, we can like bring up a like a worldwide chat, but I appreciate you guys like doing this, Mike and Patrick, and wonderful, man. Yo, congratulations. Yo, let's get this Oscar, eh?
Fingers crossed. And you know what? This is for everyone who had a question. This is a good opportunity to find us on social media within the community. Shoot us a message, find us while we're at these talks. We love chat. Again, it's a community you give to and you get back from. And so reach out. Let's get to know each other.
Yeah, we're very easy to find.
Yeah.
So.
Love it. Thank you guys so much. Oh, we really appreciate it. All right, we'll let you guys go, and thank you again, and have a great weekend. And everyone that like attended, let's get inspired, man. Let's go. Let's do it. Let's come on. Let's go.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Great day.
Take care, everyone.